Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at something we all just kind of accept, the working day. I mean, why is it 8 hours? Why not 12 or 16? We're diving into a classic text that frames this whole question, not just as a schedule, but as a fundamental conflict over our time.
Okay, so the source material kicks things off with this really powerful, almost Gothic metaphor. It describes capital as being vampire-like, that it needs to constantly consume the time and energy of living workers just to grow. Talk about a stark way to frame the relationship between employers and employees right from the get-go.
Right. So, a vampire metaphor is intense, but what does it really mean for your average Tuesday at the office or on the factory floor? Well, to get that, we first have to break down what a working day even is. Turns out, it's not as simple as just the time you spend on the clock.
So, the way our source argues it, every single working day is actually split into two very different parts. One part of the day is for you, the worker, and the other part, well, that's for the capitalist.
Okay, so first up is what the text calls necessary labor time. The easiest way to think about this is it's the hours you work to earn your keep. It's the time it takes to earn enough to pay for your food, your rent, your bills, basically everything you need to be able to show up for work again tomorrow.
And then you have surplus labor time. This is every single minute you work after you've already covered your own costs. The value you create during this extra time, it doesn't go back to you in your wages, and according to this theory, that's the source of the employer's profit. That's the surplus value.
And this is where it gets really crucial. The working day itself becomes a battleground. Because you see, that necessary part, the time to cover your wages, that's more or less fixed. But the surplus part, that's totally variable. The whole push and pull over the length of the working day is really a fight over how big that second part of the day gets.
So, this conflict over our surplus time, well, it creates what the source describes as a nearly endless drive to make the workday longer and longer. Let's dig into how this abstract idea played out with some very, very real consequences.
And here we go with another incredible metaphor. The text argues that because all profit comes from that surplus labor, capital has this inherent werewolf hunger to get as much of it as possible. And that hunger means stretching the working day to its absolute physical limits, and, as we'll see, sometimes even beyond them.
What's really interesting is how the text compares this to older ways of working. Think about a medieval serf. The split was obvious, right? You work 3 days on your own land to feed your family. That's your necessary labor. Then you work 3 days on the Lord's land. That's surplus labor, plain to see. But with a modern wage, it's all blended together, hidden in plain sight within a single paycheck.
Okay, so this drive for a longer day, it wasn't just some abstract idea. It had absolutely brutal, real-world consequences, especially during the Industrial Revolution, in industries where there were basically no rules on working hours. And the source is just filled with these harrowing stories.
I mean, just take the potteries. We're looking at official reports here documenting children, kids as young as 9, working 15-hour days. 15 hours, from 6 in the morning until 9 at night for weeks and weeks on end.
And it's not just reports. The source gives us direct testimony from the kids themselves. This is a 12-year-old boy, Jay Murray, describing working for more than 24 hours straight for no extra pay. And he says he wasn't alone. There were 8 or 9 other boys right there with him.
And you can just imagine the devastating toll this took on people's bodies. Doctors at the time were documenting it. They described whole generations of potters becoming stunted in growth, prematurely old, suffering from horrible lung diseases. One doctor even said that each new generation was, quote, more dwarfed and less robust than the one before it. The work was literally consuming them.
And look, this wasn't just happening in factories or only to children. This case became a huge public scandal. A 20-year-old dressmaker in London worked for over 26 hours straight to get dresses ready for a fancy ball, and she died. Just died from sheer exhaustion. Her doctor's testimony left no doubt about the cause.
So as you can imagine, once these horrific stories started coming out,
It sparked a massive struggle that lasted for centuries. This wasn't a fight for better pay, not at first. It was a fight for something way more basic, a legally defined and limited normal working day.
And what's so wild is that this struggle represents a total 180 in history. For hundreds of years, going all the way back to the 14th century, the state had actually passed laws to force people to work longer. But by the 1800s, the whole purpose of labor law had flipped. Now the goal was to protect people by legally shortening the workday.
But, this victory didn't happen overnight. Not even close. It was this slow, grinding legislative process. The first big law to limit adult work didn't come until 1844, followed by the huge 10 Hours Act in 1847. But every time a new law was passed, employers would find new loopholes to get around it. And even when the laws finally got on the books, the fight was far from over. The source describes how manufacturers just dug in their heels. They slashed wages, hoping workers would get desperate enough to demand their old, longer hours back. They created these complicated relay systems to get around the rules, and in some cases, they just flat out broke the law in what the text calls a pro-slavery rebellion in miniature. But here's how it finally happened. By limiting the hours for women and children, the laws effectively forced a 10-hour day on everyone because most factory work needed the whole team there at the same time. And this is the real takeaway here. The normal working day we have now, it wasn't a gift. It wasn't just handed down by generous employers or a forward-thinking government.
It was one. It was the result of a bitter, centuries-long conflict between two competing rights. The right of the employer to get the most out of the labor they paid for, and the right of the worker to, preserve their own life and health. And all this history leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time, doesn't it? In a world of smartphones, emails at midnight, and a 24/7 work culture, what does a normal working day even mean anymore? And what new limits are worth fighting for today?